Tonight we are not tickled pink, but we are tickled red, white, and blue to have Kristin Gore for a return visit to Litland here in the heart of Midtown. And thank you so much, Kristin, for gushing a little bit about us in today's newspaper. We think we're wonderful, and you help validate that. Thank you. We hosted her in the fall of 2004 with her first novel, Sammy's Hill, and we leapt at the chance to have her back again when we learned her story of young healthcare policy advisor Samantha "Sammy" Joyce was continuing with Sammy's house. And this time around, the immensely likable Sammy is working in the big house, the White House. Miss Gore's follow-up Sammy book is just as strong and delightful as the first. The plot moves deftly forward. It's unpredictable and often laugh-out-loud funny. After all, this author was the editor of the Harvard Lampoon, and she's also written for Saturday Night Live and Futurama. Anyone at all who has a job that sometimes is in conflict with her love life will find much to relate to in Sammy's house. Here's just a taste of the early reviews that have come in for Sammy's Hill. For Sammy's House. Sammy's Hill the first, now Sammy's House. From O, the Oprah magazine, an absurd and convincing rendering of everyday life in the political jungle. From Booklist, more serious in tone than her first novel, Gore's second delves more deeply into the political realm Sammy inhabits. But her heroine remains compelling and thoroughly lovable, and readers will be thrilled to find Sammy back in the saddle again as she navigates the treacheries of Washington politics and her own love life. Kristin Gore graduated from Harvard in 1999. Here's a quote from her. "I was one of those dorky kids who wanted to go to Harvard since 5th grade." We know with high confidence that Kristin Gore knows the world she writes about. She also works hard at her craft. Today, she was busy in her hotel room in Atlanta working on the screenplay to Sammy's Hill, which is to be produced by Columbia Pictures. A lovely person and writer in every way that counts. Let's give a warm welcome to the author of Sammy's Hill, Sammy's House, from her home in Los Angeles, Kristin Gore.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Julie. That was very kind. And thank all of you so much for being here. It's really a thrill for me to get to share this book with you and to be back here because I did gush a little earlier to the paper about the Margaret Mitchell House because my first visit here was so wonderful, thanks in large part to so many of you. And just in general, it's great to be in Atlanta and see so many friendly faces. And thank you, and be hydrated, it's just really nice. So I really appreciate it. Thank you all for being here. I will, I guess, just talk a little bit, and then I wanted to read a shortened, edited version of the first chapter to give you a sense of Sammy's voice, and then I am dying to just talk with you all. So I'll get to that and answer any questions if there are any. And I'm sure there will be. And so that's my plan. But in general, I grew up, in D.C. and in the political world to a certain extent. My dad was elected to Congress a couple months before I was born. So in one way, I could never escape it. In another way, I always wanted to be a writer and distance myself from that world and kind of just sat back and observed it. And my parents were very supportive of my creative ambitions. And after my professional career, after college then, was all about comedy writing. And so with this book and with Sammy's Hill, I wanted to try to combine these two worlds that were so important to me and hopefully tell an entertaining story that also gives readers a behind-the-scenes glimpse of D.C., in this case, in the White House, and from a staffer's perspective. But it's really a story about Sammy, and she is a very fun character for me to write. I didn't actually plan on writing two books. I thought that I would just do Sammy's Hill and that would be it. And I found her so entertaining and such a good time to spend my days with that I kept going in my head once I was done with Sammy's Hill and realized I had more to say. She had more adventures that she wanted to get out. And I also used to think it was very creepy when authors talked about their characters like they were real people. You know, I thought, okay, they just need to get out of the house a little bit more. And now that's me. She's, you know, a real person to me, and I do need to get out of the house a little bit more. But she's really very alive to me and fun, and I enjoyed having her carry on in this book. It was also interesting to show fictionally, of course. It is, I can't stress that enough, because people who don't know me are surprised to learn that I've been a comedy writer for 7 years, you know, and that I actually love lying for a living and making things up. And so I always emphasize that. But Sammy is a part of this new administration that's coming in with a lot of fresh energy and enthusiasm. And like her, they collectively want to change the world. And as you can imagine, as often happens in life, things don't go quite as planned. So she finds herself in the middle of lots of challenges, scandals, both in her professional life and then also personally. She's dating and she's in love with Charlie, who's a Washington Post reporter, often investigating the administration she's a part of, which causes all kinds of tension and boundary blurring that they have to deal with. But the main thing about her, you know, she's passionate, she's idealistic, she throws herself into causes. She's also a little bit of a mess in other areas. She works in healthcare, and she's a huge hypochondriac, and so she's always, you know, thinking she's coming down with the conditions and diseases that she's researching. And she has a real compassion for underdogs. She loves telemarketers, and she calls them back all the time to chat. And, you know, one telemarketer is a very close friend of hers because of that. And she can't keep her pet fish alive, and that really bothers her. They die with alarming regularity. But at the beginning of this, things seem to be in a pretty good place. She's had a fish for a long time. She's named him Cal Ripken Jr. because he's had a winning streak for life. And she's she has great hopes for him. And then she thinks she's about to get engaged to Charlie, who she's very in love with, and she's a part of this new administration. So she's thrilled. And I will read, like I said, a shortened version of the first chapter, which is called Splash. And to set the stage a little bit, she is the West Wing, the whole West Wing minus the president is out on a cruise ship, and they are celebrating the election. It's 19 months late because they've been very busy running the country and it kept getting delayed. But they're now out on a cruise ship, and RG, Robert Gary, is the vice president now, and he is below deck talking to the president when up above deck, one of the caterers, one of the waitresses, starts stripping unexpectedly, which is obviously very shocking and disruptive to everyone there. And Sammy is incredibly stunned, and the Secret Service agents are stunned, and the stripper has reached a point where concealed weapons are an impossibility anyway, and so everyone just doesn't know what to do. They finally stop her, and she announces that she was a gift from the exterminators, and she says, "Congratulations on making it this far." It's a message from them. They didn't think that you had it in you. So that's just happened. And I will start reading. The exterminators were a very disgruntled band of former officials from the previous administration. Most of them had stayed in D.C. to form an opposition think tank, and nothing seemed to please them more than perpetrating juvenile pranks while they worked very seriously to sabotage every policy change we tried to make. They hadn't named their think tank the Exterminators. That particular moniker derived from one of the many vindictive stunts they'd pulled on their way out of the West Wing, which they had vandalized to the best of their abilities in a rage against their ouster. In addition to rigging booby traps and carving their initials into various pieces of furniture, they had also taken the time to enact a much more elaborate and dastardly scheme. They'd ordered cases of frozen feeder mice, available on the internet to pet owners in need of food for raptors and reptiles, and, in an impressive labor of hate, had carefully sewn several hundred of these tiny frozen mice into the hems of all the heavy West Wing drapes. We'd noticed an unpleasant odor a few days after we'd moved in, but couldn't be positive that wasn't the way the place always smelled. But as the frozen feeder mice had thawed in their thick fabric tombs, the smell had intensified rapidly. In a little over a week, it had become unbearably wretched, rendering the West Wing virtually uninhabitable. It had been difficult to locate the precise source, since the horrific stench had seemed to emanate from the very walls around us. The maintenance crew had finally discovered the tiny, rotting rodent corpses after their fourth thorough search. That very day, a case of champagne had been delivered to the West Wing with a note that read, "To wash down the smell. Enjoy yourselves while you last, because we'll be rid of you before you know it. Love and kisses, the exterminators." And thus, an annoying nickname had been born. I knew that my own party was perfectly capable of similar pettiness, because the previous administration had complained instantly to the press when they'd moved into the White House 8 years earlier to find tuna sandwiches locked in all their file cabinets, and their computers rigged to print the chorus of Bob Dylan's Ballad of a Thin Man, no matter what the command. Some in the press had privately enjoyed the specter of then-President Pyle's political guru, Carl Jones, battling rebellious office machinery that taunted him with the words, "Because something is happening here, but you don't know what it is, do you, Mr. Jones?" printed over and over again. But the majority of columns and articles had chastised the outgoing administration for such childishness. Had we been as eager to whine to the press, we might have garnered comparable support, but we weren't the same breed of tattletales. And even taking pride in that was immature. The whole embarrassing rivalry gave me flashbacks to junior high, which frankly didn't seem all that long ago. I was 28 now and working as a healthcare advisor to the White House, but I still often felt as awkward and unsure of myself as I had during those halcyon days of orthodontic headgear and New Kids on the Block fan clubs. Though I'd spent a few fascinating years as a Capitol Hill staffer to then Senator Robert Gary, RG to his staff, the White House was an entirely different universe. The stakes, the pressure, the perpetual potential for both extraordinary progress and crippling failure, everything was ratcheted up to a spectacular intensity now that I worked for the President and Vice President of the United States. More than ever before, I felt like I needed to constantly prove myself in a new world full of gossip and cliques and all sorts of social politics. So in some ways, the junior high flashbacks were apropos, though perhaps I had slightly more of a shot at a date with new kid heartthrob Jordan Knight now. Slightly. Everyone resumed having fun. Harry Danson barked threateningly at the crowd. We instantly pretended to obey. I watched several people punching buttons on their cell phones and could practically feel the camera phone photos whisking away to the world beyond White House control. I noticed Lincoln Thomas standing by the starboard railing, as far from the heart of the crowd as he could get. As usual, he looked like a frightened stork, ready at the next instant to gather his thin legs and ruffled feathers and take off for calmer waters. Lincoln was my direct superior, the chief domestic policy advisor to the president, and I worked with him all day, every day. I was continually amazed by his excruciating shyness and considered it part of my job to try to help him overcome it. "What did you make of the show?" I asked, wondering if he might pretend not to hear me. It was an old trick of his. His eyes flitted to my face briefly and then away again as he cleared his throat in his nervous way. Every conversation was a cage for him. He'd beat against it for a panicked moment, hoping against hope for escape, before realizing he was trapped. "Well, it was, exhilarating," he finally managed. "Not exhilarating in the good I was enjoying it way," he rushed to mumble. "I just mean it was very, His face had turned red and taken on a desperate sheen. "Unexpected," I offered. He breathed in gratefully. "Exactly, unexpected," he agreed. "That's more what I meant. Not sexy or titillating or..." He trailed off, looking alarmed again. "So I think we're all set for the bill signing tomorrow," I threw out. "Yes, good," Lincoln answered thankfully. He was completely in his element when discussing work. It was everything else that he couldn't handle. "I'll see you there then. Bye," he blurted before moving quickly away. So Sammy watches Lincoln walk off to inflict his social awkwardness on someone else, and then RG comes up from below deck and gets briefed on what just happened with the stripper, and so he moves to the center and addresses everyone and sort of refocuses and re-energizes them and says, we're not here because of these silly games. We actually have something really important that we're trying to accomplish, a lot of really important things we're trying to accomplish, and it works on that group because they're easily flattered, and because at their core they're very idealistic and passionate, and so they're susceptible to those kind of pep talks. And RG says, so, let's stay on track. We are trying to change so much here. Keep up your energy, fill up on the shrimp dip and the hors d'oeuvres. We got a lot of work to do. So he's just said that. I laughed along with the others and helped toast to our future, but RG's shrimp dip comment made me wonder about the possible hazards of the hors d'oeuvres we were consuming. Now that one of the waitresses had turned out to be a hired stripper, I was newly leery of the chefs. It's not like cruise food enjoys the most stellar reputation as it is. It seemed to me that I was perpetually coming across news stories about cruise ship passengers stricken by some mystery virus or another, and the sheer number of these incidents was worrisome. As far as I could tell, it was tough to go on a cruise and not come down with a hideous foodborne illness. Good Lord, we were probably surrounded by salmonella. I looked around suspiciously at the dumplings, bruschetta, and crab cakes laid out on their trays like so many invitations to gastroenteritis. We were doomed. I could sense it. Feeling nauseous, I checked my bag for backup. I had Dramamine, various antihistamines, an eye patch, an EpiPen, some antibacterial ointment and Band-Aids, a Z-Pack in the event I needed to start antibiotics right away, and Tamiflu to combat a sudden outbreak of avian flu. Friends found my first aid kits creepy, but I considered them reassuring. I spent enough time researching healthcare issues to have an ever-expanding understanding of the countless mishaps and illnesses that were out there, just waiting to pounce. In light of the omnipresent danger, the best I could do was arm myself. I reminded myself to stay calm and not get too carried away. I knew deep down that the food was more than likely completely fine. But was that my abdomen cramping? I looked up from my kit to assess whether a medical helicopter would have enough room to land on the deck, and saw that some of my more lubricated colleagues were fashioning a conga line. Should I break up the party to inform them of their intestinal peril? Behind them, through the dusk, the Kennedy Center light slid by. My eyes moved to RG, who was a few feet away, extricating himself from a conversation as he moved a safe distance from the conga parade. He happened upon my gaze as he made his way back toward the cabin. "Seasick?" he inquired, confirming that I looked as bad as I suddenly felt. "I'm fine, sir," I answered unconvincingly. The helicopter ride would just make me more nauseous, I determined. Best to stick with a speedboat evacuation. Though now that darkness had fallen, any of these maneuvers would be tricky. How much longer were we on this damn cruise anyway? "Well, we're almost back to shore," RG said lightly, as if reading my thoughts. "Okay, deep breaths," I instructed myself. I'd really only had some chips and guacamole and a few olives, nothing dairy or fish-based. Plus, this wasn't actually a cruise ship, just a riverboat hired for the evening. There was a chance I'd live. Just as I began to settle down and feel a sense of eerie calm, an explosion of shots rang out. Reflecting back, it might have been my musing on mortality that was to blame for my reaction, or a freshly fueled sense of paranoia thanks to the stripper's reminder of the saboteurs who meant us harm. Or perhaps I really had contracted salmonella and it had made a beeline for my brain. Whatever the explanation for my actions, in retrospect, I certainly should have behaved differently. But the trouble with hindsight is that it never arrives in time. So, as the shots exploded nearby, I reacted instinctively. I rushed past my boss, the Vice President of the United States, and took a running dive headlong into the Potomac. For a split second before I hit the chilly water, it occurred to me that I might have overreacted. But it was only when I surfaced beside the boat, sputtering and in a fair amount of stinging pain, that I saw the fireworks lighting up the sky. In my defense, the fireworks had been a shock to everyone, and I noted that several people on deck were still crouched down in reaction to the abrupt explosions. None of them had opted for the extra precaution of taking to the water, but still, they'd attempted some form of self-preservation. Even the Secret Service agents had quickly circled RG, since the initial pops really had sounded like gunshots. As I doggy-paddled to keep my head above water, I noticed something else about the surprise fireworks. Something besides the fact that they just created a mortifying new memory in need of swift repression. It appeared that these were the fancy kind that formed distinguishable shapes. One specific shape, to be exact. As I gaped at the night sky, weighing the pros and cons of drowning myself, the crackling lights danced together in the unmistakable design of a grinning mouse. The exterminator's calling card. Didn't these people have anything better to do with their time? They were expending a lot of effort just to put an explosive exclamation point on their latest stunt, making sure we knew whom to credit. The police boats escorting us had cleared this portion of the river of any other craft, which meant that the exterminators must have set off the fireworks from someplace along the shore. I scanned the riverbank, but couldn't make anything out in the darkness. As the first taunting mouse slowly faded into smoke, another one exploded even closer to the boat, just above the heads of the conga crowd, who had frozen in formation. Suddenly sobered, they all stared up at the pyrotechnic prank that rained sparks down on their paused parade. I could always slip away and float downriver to a new life, I considered, as people began to point me out from the deck. I knew the currents were dangerous, but at the moment they seemed more inviting than the looks and questions I'd have to navigate back on board. "Sammy, are you okay?" someone yelled. "Physically, yes," I answered weakly. "What?" "I'm fine," I shouted more robustly, besides being an idiot, obviously. As a life preserver clocked me in the head, I wondered how many people had actually witnessed my actions. Probably not many. Most of them had doubtless been looking elsewhere, searching for the source of the sudden gunshot-like noises. Gripping the life preserver, I kicked close enough to make out the faces of those peering down from the ship's railing. There was Lincoln, looking perplexed, and Harry, looking apoplectic, and there was R.G., smiling. Smiling? I did a double take, and on second glance his smile was gone. Perhaps it existed only as a figment of my waterlogged imagination. Or perhaps it had been real, but only because R.G. had been enjoying the thought of my imminent firing. Regardless, he was now looking decidedly grim and displeased. The rest of my ignominious return aboard was a shivering, soggy blur, and before I knew it, the boat was docked and everyone was disembarking. I comforted myself that the tattooed stripper received slightly more stares than I did as I shuffled quickly past the shuttle that had been arranged to return everyone to the West Wing. There was no way I was getting on that bus. I needed some alone time. As I stood hailing a cab around the corner from 31st and K a few minutes later, wrapped in a towel I'd been lent, a siren bleated behind me. I turned to glimpse the official vice presidential motorcade rounding the corner and stepped quickly back toward the shadows to do my best impression of an anonymous homeless person. If I don't look up, they won't spot me, I told myself as I pulled the towel over my head. Through the terry cloth, I heard the siren getting closer. And then, "Samantha," a voice called gruffly. So much for my ostrich logic. They'd never struck me as the brightest birds. I reluctantly raised my head. Oh, God, it was R.G. Why on earth had he stopped? The Secret Service agent who rode in the passenger seat had leapt out and was now looking around alertly as R.G. leaned out from the shadow of his car. "Hello, sir," I squeaked, stepping hesitatingly back into the light. "Do you need a ride?" R.G. asked, indicating the extra SUVs and squad cars that had pulled close to form a protective barrier. Was this like one of those mafia ride offers, I wondered? It was more my livelihood than my life that felt threatened. If he was going to fire me, I'd rather know sooner than later, but I felt too weak and disheveled and possibly diseased to weather it now. "No, sir," I answered. "I'm waiting for a friend." "A friend," R.G. repeated. It did sound implausible. "A taxi driver type of friend, stranger," I elaborated lamely. I'm sure we'll be friends by the end of the ride." I considered burying my head back in the towel. "Uh-huh," R.G. replied flatly. "Well, I'm not going to leave you here alone at night on a deserted street. Climb into one of the support vans. I'll instruct the driver to take you where you need to go." "Yes, sir," I answered meekly. "Thank you, sir." I could see the van he was referring to toward the rear of the motorcade. R.G. was still watching me. Uh-oh, I knew that look. He was weighing a decision. He was an avid hunter, and I imagined that this was the look that came into his eyes as he was staring through his rifle scope, deciding whether or not to pull the trigger. He sighed deeply, and my career flashed before my eyes. "I'm going to tell you something, and I'm going to say it only once, understand?" His tone was harsh. I knew R.G. was capable of brutal tongue lashings, and I steeled myself for one as best I could. "Yes, sir," I managed. "Listen to me carefully. You're a smart, capable advisor. You're normally an asset to our team. But God almighty, do you have some blind spots?" I gulped. Here it came. "So just do me a favor. On your ride home, I want you to focus on one thing." He paused. "No matter what loud noises you encounter, try not to fling yourself from the van. Belly flops on asphalt are a lot tougher to recover from." Archie didn't lighten his tone or break into his teasing grin. I thought I saw the corners of his mouth twitch upward as he leaned back in his seat, but it wasn't until the car was pulling away that I finally found my voice again. "I'll try to remember that, sir. Thank you," I said to the space where his car had been, but I certainly couldn't make any promises. So I'll stop there. I just want to thank you for listening so nicely. Thank you. Thank you very much for listening. Needless to say, she goes on to have lots more explosive adventures, both in her love life and with her friendships, and also as a part of this new administration where things go a bit awry. And you know, it's sort of a comedy of errors starring a woman and a group of people with the best intentions who get thrown some crazy curveballs and get knocked around and disillusioned and have to cope in the face of all of that. So I ultimately just wanted to fictionally explore what to me is a fascinating world of DC and politics while hopefully telling an entertaining story about this young woman and her life. So I'll stop monologuing here, and I'd love to answer any questions if there are any, or just talk, or whatever you guys feel. Yes, there is a question.
Did you do any first-hand research for the camel ride described in your novel?
You've already read the camel ride part. Yeah, there is a camel ride in here, and I neglected to do first-hand research on the camel ride myself. I've had similar experiences with other animals, and I've had my best friend went into great detail about her camel ride experience. But this relates to there's a part of the book where Sammy is in India and ends up on this sort of unforgivably touristy, really uncomfortable ride on a camel that she worries does damage to her reproductive organs, and she has all kinds of problems with it. But it was fun to write. Yes.
Is there a third Sammy book in the works, or are you looking into something else?
There's no third Sammy book in the works. I'm actually writing a third novel right now that has nothing to do with her or DC or politics, actually, and it's not first person either, and I'm loving it. I really have enjoyed immersing myself in a fresh fictional world. I'm very happy with where I leave her at the end of this book. I do like her so much that I'm not sure, I would never say never, but there are other things I want to do before returning to her, if I ever do. But like I said, I hadn't even planned on doing two, so it was sort of snuck up on me. But right now it's staying at two and holding with Sammy. Thanks for the question. Yes? Yeah, I find I have a starting point and a broad outline, and I make maybe 10 pages of single space notes on everything, characters and plot twists and anything that is in my head that I want to be in the book, and then I have a big whiteboard where I map it out, and then it takes on a life of its own. So I've found that it just really evolves in unforeseen ways, and sometimes those are great, and sometimes they're a mistake, and I have to throw out those pages, but it really does sort of take me on a little bit of a ride, and so that's been my experience, which has been fun, because I sort of don't know what's going to happen every day, I think I do, and I'm wrong, so it's a good experience for me. Keeps things interesting. Yes? Right, yes. Well, I never knew firsthand if that was true, but I read the articles about that. I mean, I wasn't the one removing the W's, but for the record. But I know that, allegedly that was true, that someone did that, not me. And then it's also true that things were done in 92 that were left for the Clinton administration when they came in, and so and it's also true that had been in previous administrations done. It's an odd day, January 20th, because it's great that we have this peaceful transfer of power and democracy. The odd, bizarre part of it is that there's one day where one team leaves and another team enters, and it's I think noon, and that's it. And so you're kind of passing each other on the way out. And so I guess historically people have left little presents for each other. And so it was fun to explore, give a sort of fictional representation of that. That I went a little farther than the W on the keyboard, but yeah, there's a history of that. Yes. Yeah.
What do you do when you get writer's block?
When I get writer's block, I stick to my schedule. For me, discipline is crucial because it's so easy to just give in to a feeling of I'm not, my muse isn't with me today. I'm not feeling creative, and that's often true. But I have to be disciplined, or else that it just threatens to stretch into a longer block and become a real obstacle. And so I do pages instead of time every day, so I have to get through a certain number of pages. And on good days, that takes 2.5, 3 hours. On bad days, it's 10 terrible hours, but I just have to sit there and get through. And I find even on the miserable days, I get to a point. It might take longer, but I get to a point where I'm happy and feel like I've done something productive, even if it's just a few lines. So that's how I deal with it, semi-successfully, hopefully. Yes?
You're writing for comedy. I understand those experiences can be fairly intense.
Mm-hmm.
And with the team, what sort of things could you share a little bit about the intensity and what sort of things you learned from those experiences?
Sure, yeah. The question is about the TV comedy writing stuff, and I really loved the good parts about all that, are the energy and the collaboration, and the sort of the instant feedback. In my experience on shows, it's always sitting around a big writers' table with a bunch of other, usually guys. In my case, it was 12 guys on Futurama, and then me, and being there all day and much of the night, and coming up with better lines for each character in the script. I mean, we'd break out a story and together as a group, and a lot of the big jokes and a lot of the structure, and then one writer would take it away for 2 weeks and write the script and then bring it back, and then we'd rewrite it as a group, often line by line. Some of it obviously didn't need to be changed, but the showrunner would decide, okay, Bender the robot needs a funnier line right here, and we would be stuck there until we came up with an acceptable one. And so that can be difficult when it's 3 a.m. and you want to go home, and you're just not feeling Bender. And so that's sort of, for me, it was. The good part was that you throw something out and right away if it's funny, because that people laugh and it gets in the script, or it's brutal silence and crickets chirping, and you just develop a thick skin quickly because you just got to pitch another thing right away. But that's really nice, and it was something for me to adjust to when I went to write the novel, that I didn't have that instant feedback, and it was terrifying to have no idea whether what I thought was entertaining or good would resonate with other people at all. So I missed that. On the other hand, it was very liberating to be totally in charge of my own characters and storylines, and to be able to go so much more in depth and kind of explore the world beyond one-liners. So I've got a lot out of TV and really loved it, but I think I'm sort of more purely happy writing novels. But I hope that answers your question. Yeah. Okay. Yes. I'm sorry, what?
Writing a screenplay.
Yeah, writing the screenplay. The challenges, yeah. Well, it's, as you can imagine, totally different to tell a story cinematically. So for me, it's been just throwing out so much of the book and just thinking about it visually, and, how do you communicate who she is and these events in a way where it's really just someone's watching it, as opposed to being able to read everything that's going on in her head, and all of that. And so it's been a fun challenge for me. I felt like I incorporated a lot of what I learned in TV, and then am combining that with just the characters and the story of the novel. The other part, though, is that there are lots of notes from executives. It's like the producers, the production company, the studio, understandably have a vested interest and want to have creative input on it. And so sometimes they don't agree, though, and it's two sets of groups, and then you're stuck not knowing exactly who to pay attention to. So that's another big challenge. At this stage, there's a director who's signed on board for Sammy's Hill, David O. Russell, who did Three Kings and Flirting with Disaster, and is this creative genius, in my opinion. I love his movies, and so I'm thrilled that he's doing it. But he's also a writer, and so we're co-writing the revisions, and that's a whole other experience. So I know it takes a miracle for anything to come together in Hollywood, and so even though it's on track right now, I'm not putting all my eggs in that basket. But if it does spectacularly explode in some way, I'm just trying to soak up as much as I can, and it's a steep learning curve. So that's so far what I've learned. It's interesting. Thanks. Behind you, yeah.
Well, what's it like growing up in Washington, D.C. as a hometown? And second part, do you offer any advice to a high school student who might be considering going to college in D.C.?
Sure.
That'd be a bad idea.
Right. Growing up in D.C. Was really interesting. I grew up it was almost half. It was 4 months out of the year in Tennessee, and then the rest of the time in Arlington, right outside of D.C., until '92, when then we were in the vice president's house. And so, I didn't, until '92, I had no notion that my dad's job was any different from any other kid's parent's job. And my mom and dad did a good job of kind of keeping it that way for us and trying to keep things normal. But then I realized that D.C. had this reputation. When I moved away from it, I realized that it had this reputation of being this sort of stiff, boring town, and that surprised me, because my experience there was around all these people who were so idealistic and would come in there and try to make the world a better place. And a lot of them were maybe naive in thinking that, but they took different journeys, and when they got disillusioned, some of them would get cynical and move away, and some of them just integrated that truth into their approach to try to make it a better, just realize, okay, the world is a tougher, harder place, and things aren't so cut and dry here, but we can compromise and still get things done. And so for me, that's what I remember the most about D.C., and what impressed me the most was sort of the vitality and the energy and the spirit of the place, and that it was very young too. That there really are 24-year-old speechwriters to the president and 28-year-old healthcare policy. It's kind of frightening, but it's true. And luckily, a lot of them are smart. But I think people don't realize that. So for someone who is thinking of going to school there, my husband went to school there, and I like him a lot, so I would endorse it as a good college place. I think it puts out some good folks, and there's a lot going on there. So, and it's a beautiful city, too. I mean, it has a one-industry town reputation for obvious reasons, but there's a lot more going on there, too. And so it's a great place, I mean, I didn't want to celebrate or demonize it in either book. I wanted to try to reflect what I knew to be the case, which is that there were incredibly good, decent people, and there were shameless people, on both sides and at every level. And so, I wanted to reflect that in the characters and to explore more, why they were there. If they were there to serve themselves or serve others, or an interesting combination of the two. That, to me, was always the fascinating part of that town, that place. Yes? Favorite character in Futurama? Well, Bender the robot is very easy to write for, because he's just kind of a crazy alcoholic robot, and it sort of writes itself. But I also really like Dr. Zoidberg, the lobster doctor. He's my other favorite. I like them all, though. Yes.
What was the character of
Well, I created her right off the bat, actually before the novel even. When I was writing in TV, then I wrote a play in my free time, and it was Sammy, and I didn't quite realize it at the time, but it was really her voice, and I didn't write it I'd never written a play, and I wanted to see if I could, and so I just did it on my own without showing anyone, and that was the start of Sammy. And so then I expanded that into the first few chapters of Sammy's Hill, and I guess when I think back to the play, I really wanted, sort of what I was just talking about, that spirit of idealism and feeling like you can make a difference, which isn't all that cool, and Sammy knows that. It's much more hip to be sort of cynical and, sort of have ironic detachment, and she gets that. Like, she fully embraces the fact that she's kind of a dork, but she, I think that's what's great about her too, that she pours herself into it, and I wanted to reflect that she is kind of a celebration of the type of person I ran across time and time again in terms of that aspect of her. Her personality I totally invented, so I have, she's not me. I really like her, but I have totally different neuroses than her, plenty of them, but not hers. And so once her voice came through really strongly, then she just really was there and just, I don't know, stayed with me. So it's kind of hard. I guess I was thinking about that place and that kind of person, and then she kind of arrived, and that's why I made her healthcare policy maker as well. For me, on the comedy level, the fact that she was a hypochondriac was the big reason for that, and because it seemed like a good place to start for someone who has a burning desire to make the world a better place. So, so that's it. That's how she came about. Yes. An actress for her. I have purposely been not letting myself think about that, though it seems very fun to think about, because we're still writing, and I don't want to get a particular. It's so easy when you're doing dialogue, if you have an actress in your head and you know her work, to start, making it in that person's voice. So I've been holding off, but they have. David and the studio have, they've talked about a bunch of different people. Hopefully it'll be a really strong comedic lead role for a woman, which there aren't a ton of, So I think anyone from, this isn't, it'll sound like a very lofty list. It's not coming from me. It's the people that they have talked about include Kirsten Dunst, Rachel McAdams, Drew Barrymore, a bunch of others. So they're waiting. That we're going to finish the revisions, and then they're going to cast. But if you have any suggestions, I can pass them along. Okay. Yes.
What's your favorite memory from the Naval Observatory, whether it's interactions with staff or Secret Service?
Yeah, favorite memory. Wow. Yeah, it's funny. I was 15 when we moved in there, and it was sort of the exact wrong age to be in that position. I just kind of wanted to run away, and you don't need any help feeling awkward or embarrassed at 15, And so being thrust onto a national stage and being in that house, was difficult at first, but I did get to be real, friends with the agents and with it's run by the Navy, which is odd, but it is. And that, my favorite memories probably do involve them. I have a tight, close-knit family, and so we spent a lot of time, happy memories there, but I tend to, in my family memories, think more about Tennessee or, places outside of this sort of gated compound we were in. But the people who worked there made it a really warm, welcoming, fun place, and realizing that they were just doing their job and, did actually care about us was a nice feeling. And so we, would have my sisters and brother and I would play touch football in the yard and like try to get one of the agents to come in. And so I remember that, which they weren't supposed to do at all. And, but they would kind of like run through for a play. And so, so they have some good memories like that. Anyone else? Yes.
Your grandmother, Pauline Gore, was a very accomplished woman. Do you have some favorite memories of her?
My grandmother, yes. She was a wonderful grandmother. She was a inspiration as, I have two sisters, and she was always impressing on us. She was one of the first women to graduate from law school, from Vanderbilt Law School, and she went and set up her shingle in Arkansas, and actually did divorce law and family law, which at that time was insane, and she was just really adamant that we educate ourselves as much as we could, and no matter what job we undertook, we did our best. And it sounds corny, but that kind of message, but it really went a long way for us. She really instilled. Also, she and my granddad. I have no political aspirations at all, but because of them and my mom and dad have such a respect for politics done right as public service, because she was all about that. And again, it's easy for these phrases to sound cheesy, but she really, really impressed upon us, like, there are so many unfortunate situations in the world, and there's so many people who need some understanding and help, and that's why you should be in public service and making this a better situation for them and for all of us by kind of believing they were real. I mean, they were Democrats, but in the sort of democracy sense of the word, really just. I loved her, and she had a remarkable life because she was born into a really poor family and put herself through school, and was a waitress, and met my granddad when she was putting herself through law school, and she was a waitress, and he was putting himself through law school, and she would work nights and go to school during the day, and he would work during the day and go to school at night. So they met as she served him coffee as they were kind of passing shifts, and they had a great love story, and I miss them both, but they were great grandparents. I'll stop now because I could keep going forever, but thanks for the question. Yes, on the way back. Oh, yeah.
Sense of irony, and obviously a delightful one. Do you go about the world sort of seeing everything in ironic terms? I mean, are you going to be looking at it, this audience tonight, and sort of visualizing some funny bit?
Are you worried? Yeah. Well, thank you. That's very nice. No, I guess I early on realized that it was a better way to go through life if you could sort of laugh at yourself and at the crazy situations you find yourself in, because particularly surrounded by politics. And so I think having done it professionally now, it's sort of it is a go-to reflex for me to approach things from a more comedic sensibility, but you're safe. I'm not looking at the audience and coming up with bits in my head at all. And I'm not a performer at all. I kind of, it's when I'm quiet and thinking about things in a particular way, then my reflex is to try to make people laugh as I'm commenting on things. So that, I could have certainly written some bitter books about DC, and I didn't want to do that because I really wanted it to be more of a warm satire and a happy book for people. That just was it was a very conscious decision, and I'm happy with it because it makes it more enjoyable for me to write, and it helps me reconnect with that world in a good way, in a fun way, and that has been a good experience. Yes.
Authors usually draw on their own experiences. Did you grow up in an hysterically funny household?
household, my family, everyone in my family actually has a great sense of humor, which I know my parents' senses of humor were not often on public display, which I was fine with because I like my leaders sort of smart and serious, and I don't need a stand-up comic. But my dad has a very dry, deadpan sense of humor, and my mom has this kind of wacky, funny, outrageous sensibility, and both of them really encouraged it growing up. My siblings are all very funny. They were actually much more outgoing than I am, and so it was a place where we tried to make each other laugh. We tried to always lighten whatever was going on in that way, and for me, that probably had a lot to do with me leading, making it part of my professional aspirations too. Yes.
Kristin, was there any, I know you say it's completely fiction, but for instance, in your new book, Sammy's House, was
Yeah.
there any resonance where Archie puts his head in his hands and says, oh my God, that president has just lied to the public, this is a disaster? I mean, was there any resonance in terms of, I just don't know. You always wonder when you read.
Sure.
Was she drawing this from
Right. Right.
to any degree?
Right.
Even just a slight.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's certainly, I mean, we've had many models of scandal and corruption throughout our history, including contemporary history, and throughout the world. I mean, the president in this book has a problem with the bottle. He's sworn off. He was a heavy drinker and partier for a long time, and he's sworn it off, and he's tempted again with the stresses and the pressure. And you can read stories of presidents of Russia, for example, who've had similar issues, or other countries that you can look into. I'm definitely absorbed lots of the real life historical examples, and then I think every fiction writer incorporates, as far as I know, in terms of the ones I've talked to, parts of their own life and their experiences into their characters, but it's usually much more of an amalgam, and one person, a person in this book is just as likely to share characteristics or little things with my 5th grade art teacher or a guy I saw on the subway, or, it's all kind of in a mental blender. But I knew that the fact that it's set in the White House and that there were going to be these scandals for dramatic and comedic purposes, that people would understandably wonder how much was coming from any real life experience. And I just counted on, maybe it was silly or stupid, but I just hoped people would recognize in reading it that that I've been a fiction writer, like I said, for a long time, and so there's a certain, you can imagine if things go wrong in the White House, there are things that will happen, and I try to include a lot of surprises in this book because it's much more fun for me to invent things, but I wanted it to read true to life too, and so I did sprinkle in real life things like where the peepholes are in the White House, and where the Secret Service stashes their Uzis in the closet, and the fact that they sedate the Thanksgiving turkey before they bring it out for a photo op to pardon it because they don't want it to make a scene, So things that I thought would be fun and interesting, I included, but I really did make an effort, and it's not even an effort, it's actually really hard for me to thinly veil anything. It's much, my natural instinct is to make it up. So that was the goal, but I definitely understand the temptation to look at things and wonder if this is that, or I actually had someone in Nashville the other day who was in their 80s, and they said, this is all about Nixon and Johnson, I just know it, So it's like everyone brings their own interpretation to it, and I'm happy about that. I just put it out there.
That's actually the sign of a good lawyer.
Oh, that's nice.
But even things like that, I just hope that some of the things ring true, like fake deformed smile.
Right.
All the stuff, hopefully those are things that you do sort of bring to the play.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad. Well, that was definitely the intention. Wanted it to be as if it can happen, even though it hadn't happened. So, yes. Yes, my parents did read it before they sent it to press. Before I sent it to press, they were two of my first readers, actually, for both novels. And my mom actually reads as I write, which is great and supportive. It can be annoying because she'll call me up and demand new installments, and I'm trying to work. And she also never thinks anything's wrong. She just thinks it's perfect, which is not true and it's not helpful, but it's very sweet. And so it's nice to have her in my corner. And then my dad and my husband and a couple close friends, and then obviously my editor all read it. But luckily, both my parents really loved this book. Unless they were lying, but I don't think so. I can tell. And they thought it was better. They thought it was better than Sammy's Hill, actually, which was nice to hear. Kind of as a novelist and as a daughter, it was very. It was a nice thing. Yes.
Two questions. One is, how long does it take you to write a book? And secondly, was there something in this book that other people wanted you to take out, but you thought to keep it in because you liked that aspect of the book?
Yeah, interesting. With this book, I wrote the first draft in about 6 months, and then I did all the editing, and so it was probably a year from start to finish. With Sammy's Hill, I did it in less time because I was closer to the TV writing experience, which was so hectic and involved so many deadlines for me that I was used to being in a writer's room for 12 hours a day, and quitting that world to take a chance on a novel was so frightening that I just translated, some of those hours to Sammy's Hill. And so the story, but I think also it's the nature of the stories. For me, they really came tumbling out and had a flow and a rhythm in my head that made for fun writing. I kind of would sit down and feel like I had too much to say and need to get it out. So those were the processes for both. And for Sammy's House, I took a little more time. I was a little farther from that deadline world of TV, but also I had more that I was trying to shape and share in a different way. So that's that. And there really actually wasn't anything that someone tried to take out, that I disagreed with. I'm trying to rack my brain. I have a great relationship with my editor, and there wasn't anything they were arguing with. I tend to censor myself more, in terms of just writing style, questioning whether, is this funny? It'll seem great one day and then awful the next day, and so I'll try to take it out, and my editor will say, no, leave that in. And so it was more kind of that direction in my experience. Thanks. Yes?
Did you write like a 20-something, like Hill staff or so well. Did you ever work on the Hill as an intern or just have friends? This is often like a growing-up experience. It really is so weird for life up there.
I'm glad that perspective rings true. I never worked for a congressman or a senator or worked in the White House. I did work on Capitol Hill and was friends with a lot of staffers. And also growing up from a young age, I never really hung out with the high command. I was always hanging out with the people doing the Xeroxing and, whatever. And so that was, I kind of naturally absorbed, I guess, and they were who I liked spending time with. And so I wanted to show a person like that and show it from their perspective. And then, some really, really close friends, and then actually my husband also. So I've had some firsthand research. Yes. Japanese fighting fish. That is one of the few autobiographical things I am sorry to report. Yeah, Sammy cannot keep fish alive, and I cannot keep fish alive, and it's been very sad for me. There's a fish named Shackleton in Sammy's Hill that meets a sad demise eventually, and I had a fish named Shackleton and had a similar experience. So that I don't know what the problem is. I feel so bad about it. I really do. I try so hard. And I've stopped trying because I have the blood of too many pet fish on my hands, and I've got to cut it off. So I haven't gotten, my husband, tried to break the streak, and he gave me 2, I guess 2 years ago, and they were dead within a week. And I really did. I went and I talked to the pet store, I did everything. So that's it. I feel awful, and I'm sorry about those deaths, and I'm not going to get any more. Yeah. Or no worlds that then are depicted on TV. All you can see is what's wrong and what they've done incorrectly, and so I know doctors who can't watch ER for that reason, so I had friends who loved The West Wing, and I knew it was a great show. I just never watched a single episode. And then Studio 60, similarly, I actually was compelled by that show, but I didn't feel like it reflected Saturday Night Live or that world very well. I could just, there were some things I liked about it, but it was kind of infuriating because I just thought, nope. But but I know people who really loved it, and it just didn't take off. And then the state of TV, shows in general with the whole reality wave, and I tackle that a little bit in this because the ex-president gets suckered into doing a reality show, which is not a good move on his part. But he that has really hurt a lot of writers, actually, from because in terms of there's just not as many fictional shows to write because reality TV is taking over, and so I guess right now I love The Office, and I love 30 Rock in terms of comedies, and Curb Your Enthusiasm, but there are very few shows that I would that I watch, really, and it's better to read anyway, so to remember that. Thank you very much. Thank you.